In the freezing streets of Moscow, 1938, the city seemed to tremble under shadows that moved unseen. A photographer, notorious for his brutality, wandered through abandoned alleys and forgotten courtyards, camera in hand, seeking subjects that others feared even to acknowledge. The whispers of citizens spoke of his latest exhibitions, claiming that once someone viewed the images he developed, their perception of life and death was forever altered. These were not simple photographs. Each frame was a macabre tableau, capturing the final moments of victims with horrifying clarity. Rumors swirled that some subjects were already dead when he photographed them, while others suggested he observed the instant of demise, recording expressions with meticulous precision. In his dimly lit studio, the air thick with chemicals, he worked alone, moving with deliberate silence, adjusting exposure times, and scrutinizing every detail with obsessive care. Scholars would later debate whether his fascination stemmed from obsession, madness, or a compulsion to capture mortality in its starkest form. Visitors who dared enter his space described a suffocating tension, the walls themselves seeming to absorb and reflect the weight of countless deaths. Every print revealed meticulous attention, the placement of limbs, the subtle shadow across a face, the chilling stillness that froze time itself. Citizens spoke of faint movements in the shadows, whispers that seemed to emanate from the photographs themselves, and a presence that no scientific explanation could account for. His obsession extended beyond mere documentation. He sought to frame mortality in ways that forced confrontation with the inevitable, crafting images that were both art and horror. Streets of Moscow became extensions of his creative pursuit. Alleys and empty buildings transformed into stages where life, decay, and death converged under his lens. Light, shadow, and composition were manipulated with precision, turning the ordinary into grotesque tableau that confronted viewers with the fragility of existence. Those who encountered his work reported lasting psychological effects, nightmares, unease, and a chilling awareness of their own mortality. Even the chemicals in his darkroom seemed charged with the weight of his obsession, a faint metallic odor mingling with the smell of fixer and developer. Observers noted his calm demeanor, almost fragile in manner, contrasting sharply with the horror encapsulated in his work, a detachment that unsettled all who entered. Rumors suggested clandestine connections, granting him access to scenes of tragedy and death that others could not witness, feeding his growing compulsion. The city itself seemed complicit, providing abandoned hospitals, morgues, and condemned apartments where he meticulously staged his subjects. Each photograph told a narrative of vulnerability and finality, a frozen moment of human fragility. Scholars argued that his work blurred the line between artistic genius and ethical atrocity, a duality that haunted historical analysis for decades. His camera, a large format tool with glass plates, became an extension of his obsession, capturing every nuance of mortality with surgical precision. Citizens whispered of seeing him in shadowed streets, camera clicking softly, a spectral presence turning life and death into images that could never be unseen. Each print arranged in his dim studio seemed to possess an energy of its own, as though the essence of the dead lingered, observing the living intruders who dared to gaze upon them. His work became legendary, whispered in underground artistic circles, a combination of fascination, fear, and relentless confrontation with the macabre. Every corridor, abandoned room, and crumbling staircase was transformed into a canvas where death was staged, framed, and immortalized. Observers reported subtle changes in prints, expressions that shifted with mood or time, defying rational explanation and enhancing the legend of his genius. The chilling perfection of composition, lighting, and subject placement created an experience that was as much psychological as visual, forcing viewers into a confrontation with mortality that was unavoidable. His obsession was not simply with death, but with how death looked, how it could be captured and eternalized, creating images that transcended conventional photography. Even decades later, the surviving prints carry the weight of that era, a haunting reminder of one man's unflinching exploration of mortality and his ability to transform horror into permanent, chilling art. Moscow itself, a city tense with political purges and fear, amplified the dread his work elicited, each alley and shadow serving as an unwitting participant in his obsession. Historians would later marvel at the technical mastery and ethical ambiguity intertwined in his prints, unable to separate genius from atrocity, and yet captivated by the undeniable intensity of his vision. The darkroom, the chemicals, the controlled lighting, and the meticulous attention to each subject combined to create an environment that was both laboratory and stage, horror and art seamlessly intertwined. Those who survived encounters with his prints described a lingering psychological weight, a sense of moral confrontation, and a haunting impression that life itself was temporary and fragile under his lens. His obsession, genius, and brutality became inseparable, each print a testament to the extremes of human focus and the terrifying possibilities when obsession meets skill. The city of Moscow, under the bitter winter of 1938, seemed to fold into itself, each street and alley concealing shadows where the brutal photographer might appear. His reputation had grown into myth, whispered among citizens who dared not speak his name aloud. Those who glimpsed his work described it as simultaneously mesmerizing and horrifying, an unflinching confrontation with mortality that left an indelible mark on the mind. Inside his studio, the air was thick with chemicals, a pungent mixture that mingled with the metallic undertone of obsession, a scent that seemed to signify the presence of death itself. Every print lined the walls, a chilling gallery of frozen expressions arranged with exacting care so that the narrative of life ending was unavoidable. Observers who ventured inside reported a near-religious hush, as though the room itself demanded reverence for the frozen souls captured there. The photographer moved silently, adjusting exposure, developing plates, and observing each image with a meticulous eye, never rushed, always deliberate. Rumors claimed that some subjects had been enticed, coerced, or discovered in their final moments, their last expressions preserved for eternity. Scholars later argued that his work bordered on the macabre, a mixture of artistry and ethical transgression, leaving viewers to grapple with questions of morality, mortality, and aesthetic beauty intertwined with horror. Shadows in the studio seemed to shift independently, casting forms that unnerved even the most composed visitors. Light was manipulated to perfection, highlighting pallor, texture, and the eerie stillness of his subjects. Even those familiar with anatomy and forensic detail were unsettled, noting the precision with which he captured the nuances of death. His methodology was systematic, every angle, every subtle shift of the body, and every shadow calculated to maximize emotional impact. Stories spread through the underground about late-night excursions, him wandering alleys and abandoned buildings, camera at the ready, capturing the macabre scenes others would flee. Citizens spoke of a spectral presence, footsteps echoing, camera clicks like distant warnings, a reminder that the photographer could be anywhere observing life and death simultaneously. His work, while technically impeccable, evoked unease far beyond aesthetic appreciation, forcing confrontation with the inevitability of mortality. Observers found themselves questioning the boundaries between art, obsession, and atrocity, unable to separate the beauty of composition from the horror of the subject matter. Each photograph presented a paradox, a perfect technical rendering of life ending, yet morally and psychologically unsettling, leaving the viewer unsettled long after leaving the studio. The city, tense with political oppression, provided a backdrop that magnified his work, every abandoned structure and silent street contributing to the staging of death. Even decades later, surviving prints retain the capacity to disturb, a chilling reminder of one man's relentless pursuit of mortality as subject, medium, and obsession. His presence in Moscow became legendary, an invisible force, a combination of skill, cruelty, and psychological insight that blurred the line between observer and participant. Each print, meticulously developed, demonstrated his ability to control not just light and shadow, but the emotional resonance of death itself. The studio, an altar to obsession, bore witness to countless hours spent perfecting compositions, manipulating chemical processes, and arranging bodies to achieve maximum psychological impact. Observers who returned later spoke of lingering unease, the sense that the images contained something beyond mere representation, a presence that could not be rationalized or escaped. The photographer's genius was inseparable from his brutality, each frame a meditation on mortality that left an enduring mark on all who encountered it. Even with time, The weight of his work persisted, an indelible fusion of horror, skill, and obsessive documentation that continues to haunt the historical record and the imaginations of those who study it. Moscow, frozen and tense, became both subject and stage, every shadow and alleyway a contributor to the narrative of life and death he sought to eternalize. His obsession with capturing mortality in its rawest, most unflinching form defined his legacy, a chilling reminder of what can occur when brilliance and brutality intersect. Moscow, 1938, was a city cloaked in fear, tension, and unspoken dread, where citizens moved cautiously through icy streets, wary of unseen eyes and hidden dangers. The brutal photographer's presence had become an unspoken reality, whispered in hushed tones among neighbors, artists, and the curious alike. His studio, hidden within a secluded, decaying building, was a chamber of both technical mastery and profound horror, its walls lined with images that captured the dead with unnerving clarity. Every photograph reflected meticulous planning, subjects arranged with exacting care, lighting manipulated to highlight pale skin, shadowed expressions, and the fragile vulnerability of life at its end. Rumors circulated that some subjects were already lifeless when he photographed them, while others claimed he had observed the exact moment of death, freezing final expressions forever. The methodology was both clinical and obsessive. Cameras, large-format glass plates, trays of chemicals, and precise timing allowed him to create images that transcended ordinary photography. Observers spoke of the overwhelming atmosphere in his studio, the dim lighting casting long shadows that seemed almost alive, and the pervasive sense that the room itself held the weight of countless deaths. Visitors described an oppressive silence, punctuated only by the faint clicking of the shutter and the soft bubbling of chemicals in developing trays. The metallic scent of fixer mingled with other more unsettling odors, a subtle reminder that these were not mere artistic experiments, but encounters with mortality itself. Locals, despite fear, could not resist curiosity, drawn to the legend of a man capable of transforming death into both documentation and artistry. Historians later debated whether his work crossed ethical boundaries, questioning whether immortalizing death in such graphic and meticulous detail could ever be justified. Yet the fascination with his prints persisted, a blend of horror and admiration for the technical perfection, the macabre elegance, and the psychological impact. His life outside the studio remained enigmatic, almost ghost-like, polite, quiet, and withdrawn, yet with an intensity in his gaze that betrayed his obsession. Moscow's abandoned buildings, decaying hospitals, and neglected apartments became his stages, chosen for their capacity to evoke unease, natural shadows, and a sense of impermanence. Each location contributed to the narrative he sought to construct, where life, decay, and mortality converged under his lens. The city's tension, political purges, and pervasive fear of authority amplified the chilling effect of his work, every alley and corridor becoming both subject and collaborator in his macabre compositions. Scholars noted his deep study of anatomy, his understanding of skin, muscle, and the subtleties of human expression, ensuring that every photograph was both precise and unnervingly lifelike. Visitors often remarked on a strange energy in the room, as if the images themselves observed the living, their eyes following intruders in a silent, relentless stare. The interplay of light and shadow, the chemical transformations in his darkroom, and the deliberate arrangement of subjects created a psychological intensity that was almost tangible, forcing viewers to confront their own mortality. Even those trained in forensic and artistic analysis were unsettled by the combination of technical mastery and profound horror embedded in each frame. Accounts of the photographer's nocturnal wanderings spread through the city. He moved silently through frozen streets, camera ready, capturing glimpses of decay and neglect, transforming them into permanent records of mortality. Each photograph presented a paradox, technically brilliant yet ethically disturbing, visually captivating yet psychologically harrowing. The meticulous choreography of death, light, shadow, and composition ensured that viewers could not look away, unable to separate fascination from revulsion. Reports suggested that some prints seemed to alter subtly with time or the observer's perception, a phenomenon unexplained by science but consistent with the legend surrounding his work. His obsession with mortality extended beyond the studio, influencing how he navigated the city, interacted with subjects, and staged each moment for maximum impact. By carefully selecting locations and arranging subjects with obsessive precision, he transformed ordinary spaces into haunting tableaux, forcing the observer to witness the finality of life with an unflinching gaze. The city itself, steeped in political tension and fear, became a silent accomplice, every abandoned structure contributing to his narrative. Those who encountered his work described lasting psychological effects, ranging from unease and nightmares to a profound awareness of the fragility of existence. His prints were studied, debated, and feared, the legacy of his obsession and skill becoming inseparable from the mythos that surrounded him. In this context, the photographer's life, methods, and artistic obsession were forever intertwined with the chilling reality of 1938 Moscow, a city simultaneously terrified and fascinated by the presence of a man who documented death with unparalleled mastery, turning fear into both art and legend. The brutal photographer's studio, a hidden chamber in Moscow, was both sanctuary and stage, where death and artistry intertwined in ways that unsettled all who entered. Every wall, every surface bore evidence of his obsession, prints meticulously aligned, each subject frozen in a moment that blurred the line between life and posthumous stillness. Visitors described an oppressive quiet, punctuated only by the faint click of his camera or the soft bubbling of chemicals in the trays. The smell of fixer and developer mixed with a metallic undertone that hinted at the finality of life captured within the frames. Rumors persisted that some subjects were coerced, lured, or found in moments of vulnerability, their final expressions preserved with chilling precision. Yet others whispered that the photographer sought only those whose deaths were imminent, observing and capturing the exact instant life ebbed, creating images that were both technically flawless and morally disturbing. The city itself seemed to accommodate his obsession. Abandoned hospitals, condemned apartments, and shadowed alleyways providing the perfect backdrop for his macabre artistry. Scholars later debated whether his work should be classified as art, atrocity, or a unique fusion of both, recognizing the genius and horror that coexisted within each frame. Every print told a story of mortality, compelling viewers to confront the fragility and inevitability of death, an experience that left an indelible psychological mark. Locals who glimpsed him in the streets whispered of a spectral presence, moving silently, camera in hand, turning the mundane and familiar into moments of unflinching observation. His meticulous study of anatomy, combined with his understanding of light and composition, allowed him to render death with a lifelike clarity that unsettled even those trained to study human decay. The studio, dimly lit and carefully arranged, became a theater where he directed the interplay of life, death, and observer, orchestrating each element to maximize the emotional impact of his work. Shadows shifted with the flickering candlelight, creating an almost sentient atmosphere, a sense that the images themselves were alive and watching. Those who viewed the prints reported sensations of unease, faint whispers, and a persistent awareness that mortality was not distant but immediate, unavoidable, and intimately observed. Stories of his nocturnal excursions spread, tales of him photographing the forgotten and the dead, wandering frozen streets, always unseen yet always present. The precision with which he composed each image reflected both technical mastery and an obsessive compulsion, a need to capture death's final expression without interference or hesitation. Visitors noted that even unexposed glass plates seemed to carry an aura, a subtle energy that defied scientific explanation, enhancing the mystique surrounding the photographer and his work. The psychological weight embedded within the photographs was intentional. Each shadow, each angle, each carefully staged detail crafted to evoke an unavoidable confrontation with mortality. Moscow's political climate, fraught with purges, oppression, and constant fear, amplified the effect of his work, every abandoned building and desolate street serving as a silent collaborator. Scholars attempting to analyze his methodology faced ethical dilemmas, questioning the morality of immortalizing death in such vivid and intimate detail, while acknowledging the undeniable technical skill. His obsession with capturing mortality was total, extending beyond mere technique to influence his movements, choices, and interactions with the environment. Locations were chosen not only for visual composition but also for their ability to heighten the emotional and psychological impact of the scene. Each photograph created a tableau in which the viewer could not escape the inevitability of death, a confrontation that was as intellectual as it was visceral. His life, hidden and enigmatic, contributed to the legend, a man who moved silently through Moscow, observing, capturing, and transforming death into images that challenged the boundaries of art, ethics, and human perception. Even decades later, the surviving prints retain the power to disturb, offering insight into a genius obsessed with mortality, a brutality tempered by technical precision, and a vision that transformed the macabre into a permanent record. Moscow, frozen in tense, had become both stage and subject. Every shadowed alley, abandoned building, and silent courtyard contributing to the haunting narrative of one man's relentless pursuit of death's unflinching image. The intersection of obsession, skill, and darkness defined his legacy, a chilling testament to the power of focus, the weight of mortality, and the enduring horror captured through the lens of a man who refused to shy away from the inevitable. As the bitter winter of 1938 pressed on, Moscow's streets grew even more silent, shadows lengthening across frozen cobblestones, and a tense unease settled over the city. The brutal photographer's presence became almost mythic, whispered among locals who spoke in hushed tones of his exploits and the chilling perfection of his work. Every alleyway, abandoned building, and deserted courtyard seemed a potential stage for his unrelenting gaze, where mortality would be captured in unflinching detail. Those who had glimpsed his studio described a space filled with the macabre, walls lined with prints, each image depicting the dead in precise arrangement, shadows falling exactly where intended, expressions frozen in an eternal horrifying stillness. Rumors swirled that he had acquired access to spaces forbidden to the public, morgues, condemned hospitals, and private homes, allowing him to document death moments others could not witness. The photographer's obsession with composition, lighting, and anatomical accuracy ensured that every subject, every frame, conveyed both horror and a perverse artistry. Citizens spoke of his nighttime excursions, moving silently through frozen streets, camera-ready, capturing scenes that combined decay, abandonment, and human vulnerability. His methodology combined scientific understanding, artistic sensibility, and a disturbing comfort with death, resulting in images that were at once technically brilliant and psychologically harrowing. Observers reported the strange effect of his work. Prints seemed almost alive, subtle changes in expression or shadow creating the impression that the dead were aware of being watched. Scholars and historians later debated the ethical implications, questioning whether such unflinching documentation was artistic genius or moral atrocity. The city's climate, both political and environmental, amplified the horror. Purges, disappearances, and fear permeated daily life, providing a backdrop that made his work even more unsettling. His darkroom became a laboratory and theater combined, chemicals bubbling in trays, lighting adjusted minutely, each print developed with obsessive care. Those who visited described an oppressive stillness, the room feeling saturated with the weight of mortality, shadows dancing across walls as candlelight flickered. Rumors suggested that some subjects were drawn to him, others discovered in moments of imminent death, yet all were rendered with clinical precision, their final expressions immortalized in meticulous detail. Even the air in his studio seemed charged, a metallic undertone mingling with the chemical smell, signaling the presence of death captured and contained. Stories spread of encounters in alleyways, the photographer appearing suddenly, capturing an image before vanishing into the night, leaving witnesses shaken and fearful. Every photograph conveyed narrative, not merely of death but of the fragility, impermanence, and vulnerability of human life, forcing viewers to confront realities most preferred to ignore. His skill with lighting and composition turned the ordinary into grotesque tableau, where shadows, textures, and body placement combined to evoke profound unease. The psychological intensity of each image was deliberate, orchestrated to ensure that viewers experienced not just horror, but a deep, reflective confrontation with mortality. The city itself became a collaborator, abandoned hospitals, decrepit apartments, and frozen courtyards providing perfect staging grounds for his obsessive work. Observers noted that the image's effect could extend beyond the studio. Nightmares, unease, and subtle feelings of dread often persisted long after viewing. The meticulous choreography of light, shadow, subject placement, and timing ensured that each photograph maintained a grip on both eye and mind. Rumors of supernatural resonance circulated, prints seeming to shift subtly depending on the viewer, an effect no scientific explanation could resolve, further enhancing the mythos surrounding the photographer. His obsession with death transcended mere documentation. He sought to capture the essence, the final truth of human existence, freezing it with skill, patience, and unsettling devotion. Moscow, tense with political paranoia and fear of purges, provided both cover and amplification for his work, the city itself reinforcing the dread and fascination his presence inspired. Visitors and scholars alike wrestled with the duality of brilliance and horror, unable to fully reconcile admiration for technique with revulsion at subject matter. His work left an indelible psychological imprint, the combination of skill, brutality, and obsession producing images that continue to haunt the historical record. Each print, meticulously staged, invited reflection on mortality, the human condition, and the inexorable approach of death, compelling viewers into a confrontation with truths they could neither escape nor ignore. The city of Moscow, cloaked in frost and silence, became an unwitting stage for the brutal photographer's relentless pursuit of mortality. Every night, shadows stretched across deserted streets as he moved with quiet precision, camera in hand, searching for subjects that fate had left vulnerable. Rumors spread through whispered conversations in dimly lit apartments and hidden cafes, describing the photographer's uncanny ability to locate death moments others could not perceive. In his studio, walls were lined with macabre prints, each meticulously arranged, every detail calculated. A hand falling across a floor, the faint curve of a lifeless face, shadows falling in patterns that accentuated the finality of each subject. Visitors who dared enter spoke of an oppressive stillness, a presence in the room that seemed to hover, drawing attention to the chilling perfection of his work. The chemical scent of fixer and developer, mixed with metallic undertones, creating an atmosphere thick with the suggestion of death, as if the air itself remembered the countless moments captured within the frames. Some prints depicted subjects already deceased, others captured the final expressions at the instant of life's end, each rendered with disturbing clarity. Scholars would later debate whether the work was artistic genius, ethical transgression, or a combination of both, unable to separate technical mastery from moral unease. The photographer's study of anatomy, light, and composition allowed him to create images that were scientifically precise, yet emotionally horrifying, leaving a lasting impression on all who viewed them. Moscow's political climate, dominated by purges, fear, and pervasive surveillance, amplified the chilling effect of his work, turning every alley and abandoned building into a potential scene for observation and documentation. Locals whispered about encounters in shadowed streets, glimpses of a figure moving silently, camera poised, capturing life and death simultaneously. His obsession extended beyond mere documentation. He sought to frame mortality, rendering it in ways that compelled confrontation with inevitability. Every frame, every shadow, every angle was carefully orchestrated to produce maximum psychological impact. Reports suggested that even unexposed glass plates carried a subtle energy, an awareness that defied explanation, furthering the myth surrounding the photographer's presence. The interplay of light and shadow, the precise arrangement of limbs, and the calculated positioning of subjects created tableaux that were both visually stunning and morally unsettling. Visitors experienced lingering effects, nightmares, unease, and an acute awareness of the fragility of existence. Rumors claimed that the photographer's nocturnal excursions often brought him to sites of tragedy, abandoned apartments or hospitals, turning real-life horror into meticulously framed imagery. Each photograph presented a paradox, technically brilliant, capturing the human form with scientific exactitude, yet ethically and psychologically disturbing. Scholars, artists, and ordinary citizens alike struggled to reconcile the beauty of composition with the horror of subject matter, an internal conflict that reinforced his legend. The city itself acted as collaborator, amplifying the tension inherent in his work, abandoned courtyards, dim alleys, and frozen streets, contributing to the atmosphere that he exploited. Observers noted that his work could manipulate perception, subtle variations in expression and shadow seeming to shift with time, creating an almost supernatural effect. His obsession with mortality went beyond mere recording. He sought to encapsulate essence, presence, and inevitability, freezing it permanently with precision and unwavering focus. Moscow, tense under political oppression, purges and pervasive fear, inadvertently heightened the psychological weight of his work, every abandoned building contributing to the chilling narrative he created. The meticulous staging, calculated lighting, and precise composition ensured that each image confronted viewers with unavoidable truths, forcing reflection on mortality, vulnerability, and the inexorability of death. Stories of nocturnal wanderings, sudden appearances, and vanishing into shadowed streets added layers to his legend, blending fact, rumor, and myth into a haunting narrative. His prints, meticulously developed, demonstrated the fusion of obsession, skill, and psychological insight, creating a haunting legacy that persists in historical accounts. Each subject, scene, and frame was a calculated confrontation with mortality, leaving observers both fascinated and horrified, aware of the boundaries between art, brutality, and the human condition. The weight of his work was amplified by the city itself, Moscow frozen in tense, every alley, corridor, and abandoned space contributing to the narrative, reinforcing the power of obsession over death immortalized in silver halide. His relentless pursuit of mortality as both subject and medium solidified his legacy, an enduring reminder of how brilliance, obsession, and brutality could converge to create images that haunt long after their creation, leaving a chilling imprint on both history and consciousness. The final months of 1938 saw Moscow shrouded in an eerie stillness, as the brutal photographer intensified his relentless pursuit of death's unflinching image. Word of his latest work had begun to circulate more widely, whispers of photographs depicting the most intimate and horrifying moments of demise, creating both fear and fascination throughout the city. In the secluded confines of his studio, dim light fell over carefully arranged prints, each one meticulously positioned to maximize impact, every shadow and angle deliberately chosen to capture the haunting essence of mortality. Citizens spoke of his sudden excursions, moving silently through frozen alleys and abandoned buildings, camera in hand, often vanishing as if swallowed by the shadows themselves. Each photograph represented not only a study of death, but a confrontation with the fragility of life, a chilling reminder of the inevitability that every human being must face. The meticulous staging of subjects, whether freshly deceased or at the final moment of life, allowed him to immortalize expressions of fear, surrender, or resignation, the macabre artistry pushing the boundaries of both ethics and skill. Observers noted the intensity of his focus, a calm, almost clinical detachment that contrasted with the horror embodied in the images he created. Each print a fusion of technical brilliance and profound psychological weight. Moscow's political climate, rife with purges, disappearances, and pervasive fear, provided the perfect backdrop for his relentless work, every abandoned structure or shadowed alleyway becoming an instrument in his artistic and obsessive vision. Rumors circulated that some subjects were drawn into his domain willingly, seeking fame or understanding, while others were discovered in moments of vulnerability or imminent death, each circumstance meticulously orchestrated to serve the chilling aesthetic he pursued. Scholars debated endlessly whether his work was a pioneering study of mortality or a horrifying exploitation, unable to reconcile the beauty and technical mastery of the prints with the ethical and emotional gravity of their subjects. The photographer's deep understanding of anatomy, combined with his mastery of light, shadow, and composition, created images that were scientifically precise yet emotionally devastating, ensuring that viewers confronted death in its most raw and intimate form. Each frame conveyed a narrative, not merely of life ending but of the profound vulnerability of the human condition, every detail calculated to evoke unease, reflection, and fascination simultaneously. Observers who entered the studio described the oppressive atmosphere, the metallic scent of chemicals blending with the intangible weight of the countless deaths recorded on each plate. Shadows cast by flickering light seemed almost alive, enhancing the perception that the dead within the prints were aware of those who gazed upon them. Stories spread of his nocturnal movements, the sudden appearance in a deserted street or alley, capturing images that immortalized decay, suffering, and finality, then disappearing as silently as he had arrived. The psychological impact of these images was profound. Nightmares, lingering dread, and a newfound awareness of mortality haunted those who dared witness his work firsthand. Each photograph was a meticulous orchestration of light, shadow, subject positioning, and composition, designed to challenge the observer, to force reflection on the inevitability of death and the fleeting nature of life. Moscow itself, a city steeped in fear, political oppression, and silence, amplified the power of his work. Every abandoned building, frozen street, and darkened corridor, contributing to the eerie realism captured in his prints. Even unexposed plates seemed to carry the weight of mortality, a subtle energy that defied scientific explanation and reinforced the legend surrounding the photographer. His obsession with documenting death was total, influencing not only his artistic choices but his movements, his selection of subjects, and the orchestration of each scene. The resulting images were a paradox, technically brilliant and visually captivating, yet ethically and psychologically disturbing, leaving viewers caught between admiration and revulsion. Scholars, artists, and citizens alike wrestled with the duality of his work, unable to separate technical mastery from the emotional and moral impact of what he had captured. The meticulous attention to detail, the orchestration of composition and lighting, and the unwavering focus on capturing mortality in its most intimate and revealing form, ensured that each print left an enduring psychological imprint. The photographer's relentless pursuit of perfection in his craft elevated his work beyond mere documentation, transforming it into a haunting meditation on life, death, and the human condition, forcing confrontation with truths that could neither be ignored nor forgotten. Even decades later, surviving prints continue to provoke awe, horror, and reflection, a testament to the fusion of skill, obsession, and brutality that defined his legacy. The brutal photographer's work reached a terrifying culmination as winter deepened, and Moscow's streets seemed emptier, shadows longer, and the city gripped by an unspoken dread. Inside his studio, prints covered every wall, each meticulously developed, arranged with obsessive precision to elicit maximum psychological impact. Subjects, whether recently deceased or captured in the final moments of life, were frozen in terrifying clarity, their expressions conveying fear, resignation, and the absolute finality of death. Citizens whispered about sightings in alleys and abandoned buildings, accounts of a solitary figure moving silently, camera in hand, capturing death that most would never dare to confront. The dark room's chemical fumes mingled with the metallic scent of mortality, creating an atmosphere charged with intensity and an unsettling presence. Observers noted that every detail, from the angle of limbs to the play of shadow across faces, was carefully orchestrated to heighten the chilling effect, leaving no element to chance. The psychological weight of these photographs was undeniable. Even those trained in art, anatomy, or forensic science found themselves unnerved, questioning the morality, obsession, and genius intertwined within each image. Moscow's pervasive fear, caused by political purges, disappearances, and the oppressive silence of citizens, amplified the impact of his work, every abandoned building and frozen courtyard contributing to the staged scenes of mortality. Rumors circulated that he sometimes timed his work to coincide with the final moments of life, observing and capturing expressions with precision that blurred the line between observation and participation. Scholars debated the ethical boundaries of his art, recognizing the technical brilliance but recoiling from the moral implications, unsure whether the work was documentation, exploitation, or a profound meditation on death. The interplay of light, shadow, and subject positioning ensured that each photograph was both visually stunning and psychologically devastating, forcing the viewer to confront mortality in its most intimate form. Observers described sensations of presence emanating from the prints, as if the captured souls lingered, watching, compelling acknowledgement of life's impermanence. His obsession extended beyond technical mastery. It influenced every movement, choice of subjects, and the orchestration of each scene, turning the city into a collaborator in his haunting tableau. Each frame carried a narrative not merely of death but of vulnerability, inevitability, and the transient nature of existence, compelling reflection long after leaving the studio. Stories of nocturnal excursions, sudden appearances, and immediate disappearances added to the legend, blending rumor, fact, and fear into an unshakable mythos surrounding his work. The meticulous choreography of death, lighting, and shadow ensured that the viewer could neither avert their gaze nor escape the psychological weight of the images. Scholars and artists struggled to reconcile admiration for his technical skill with revulsion at the subject matter, recognizing the duality that defined both the photographer and his legacy. The city's frozen alleys and abandoned structures provided natural staging grounds, enhancing the realism and intensity of each composition, reinforcing the chilling narrative captured in his prints. Even decades later, surviving images provoke awe, horror, and reflection, a testament to the fusion of brilliance, obsession, and brutality that immortalized mortality under his lens. His relentless pursuit of perfection transformed each image into a meditation on life's fragility, the inevitability of death, and the psychological weight of observing mortality firsthand. Every print, every frame, every meticulously calculated shadow and angle contributed to a haunting legacy that continues to reverberate, leaving a chilling imprint on history, art, and the human imagination. After the culmination of the photographer's relentless pursuit of mortality, Moscow remained steeped in an uneasy silence, as citizens whispered of the images that had spread both fear and fascination throughout the city. The prints, meticulously developed and arranged, became objects of obsession and terror, each one a testament to the photographer's unparalleled skill and his chilling dedication to capturing the finality of life. Observers reported lingering psychological effects, nightmares, and a pervasive sense of unease, as if the presence of those immortalized in the images lingered beyond the studio walls. Scholars debated the ethical implications of his work, questioning whether the meticulous documentation of death could ever be justified, yet acknowledging the technical brilliance that allowed such precise representation of life's end. The city itself, frozen and tense, contributed to the atmosphere of dread that surrounded the photographer and his creations. Abandoned buildings, desolate streets, and shadowed alleys becoming involuntary collaborators in the staging of death. Rumors suggested that some subjects had been coerced or discovered in moments of extreme vulnerability, their final expressions captured with a precision that blurred the line between documentation and violation. His darkroom, a laboratory of obsession, continued to hum with chemical reactions, developing trays bubbling as shadows and light were manipulated with exacting care. Visitors described the oppressive stillness, the weight of mortality pressing down on all who entered, every print a confrontation with inevitability and the fragility of existence. The psychological intensity of each image was deliberate, orchestrated to elicit both fascination and horror, forcing viewers to engage with the reality of death they might otherwise ignore. Scholars and historians noted the meticulous attention to anatomical detail, the careful staging of limbs and the manipulation of lighting to create dramatic contrast, heightening the visual and emotional impact. Moscow's political climate, rife with purges and pervasive fear, magnified the effect of the photographs, every abandoned corridor, frozen street, and derelict building reinforcing the narrative of mortality captured within each frame. Observers reported subtle sensations of presence emanating from the prints, a lingering awareness that the dead were watching, creating a psychological resonance that transcended mere representation. His obsession extended beyond photography, influencing every movement, decision, and interaction, turning the city itself into a stage upon which mortality was made visible. The resulting prints, both technically brilliant and morally unsettling, challenged observers to confront uncomfortable truths, blending artistry, brutality, and psychological manipulation in a manner unparalleled in Moscow or elsewhere. Stories of nocturnal excursions, sudden appearances in shadowed streets, and the photographer vanishing without trace reinforced the myth surrounding his work, making him simultaneously feared, admired, and reviled. Each image became a narrative, a frozen testament to the inevitability of death, compelling reflection on the fragility of life, the passage of time, and the consequences of obsession. Scholars debated the intersection of technical mastery, ethical responsibility, and psychological impact, recognizing that the photographer's genius could not be divorced from the horror of his methods. The meticulous choreography of subject, light, and shadow ensured that each photograph was a confrontation, an unavoidable encounter with mortality that forced observers to acknowledge what they could not escape. The prints, surviving decades later, continue to evoke awe, horror, and reflection, a testament to the fusion of brilliance, obsession, and brutality that immortalized death under the lens. Each frame, carefully calculated and developed, transformed fleeting mortality into a permanent haunting record, leaving a chilling imprint on history, art, and consciousness. The city, frozen and tense, had become both stage and participant, Every alleyway, abandoned building, and shadowed corridor contributing to the narrative meticulously constructed by the photographer. The legacy of his work demonstrates how obsession, skill, and psychological insight can converge to create images that endure, provoke, and haunt long after their creation. Moscow, silent and fearful, remained a backdrop to the macabre artistry, amplifying the impact of images that captured the human condition in its most vulnerable, final, and haunting form. The impact of the brutal photographer's work extended far beyond his studio, reaching every corner of Moscow, where whispers of his images circulated in hushed tones. Citizens who had glimpsed the prints spoke of lingering fear, nightmares, and an unsettling awareness of mortality that refused to fade. Scholars debated endlessly about the ethics of his work, acknowledging technical brilliance yet questioning whether immortalizing death in such intimate detail could ever be justified. The prints were studied in secret, their chilling clarity revealing every nuance of expression, shadow, and composition, capturing the final moments of life with precision and artistry. Moscow's abandoned hospitals, decrepit apartments, and shadowed streets had become unwilling collaborators, providing perfect settings for scenes that forced observers to confront the fragility of existence. Some subjects were rumored to have been coerced or discovered in moments of extreme vulnerability, their final expressions captured forever under the photographer's exacting eye. The dark room continued to hum with obsessive energy, chemicals bubbling as light, shadow, and subject placement were meticulously manipulated to heighten the psychological impact of every image. Visitors described oppressive stillness, a presence in the room that seemed to extend beyond the prints themselves, as if the dead watched silently from every frame. The meticulous staging, careful choreography of limbs, and precise lighting ensured that each photograph was both visually stunning and morally disturbing, forcing confrontation with the inevitable end of life. Moscow's political tension, pervasive fear, and constant surveillance amplified the chilling effect, turning every corner of the city into a potential scene for the photographer's obsessive work. Observers often reported a subtle, inexplicable energy emanating from the prints, a lingering sense of life that seemed to defy explanation, enhancing the legend surrounding the artist. The photographer's obsession extended beyond technical mastery. It governed his movements, his selection of subjects, and the orchestration of every scene, transforming the city itself into a stage for mortality. Each print became a narrative of human fragility, vulnerability, and the certainty of death, compelling viewers to confront truths they might otherwise avoid. Stories of nocturnal wanderings, sudden appearances, and vanishing into shadowed streets added layers to the myth, blending fact, rumor, and fear into an enduring legend. The psychological weight of the images was intentional, designed to provoke awe, horror, and reflection, leaving a lasting impact on all who encountered them. Scholars struggled to reconcile admiration for the technical skill with revulsion at the subject matter, understanding that brilliance and brutality coexisted in every frame. Moscow's frozen streets and abandoned spaces enhanced the realism and intensity of each composition, reinforcing the chilling narrative captured in the prints. Even decades later, the surviving images continue to evoke strong reactions, demonstrating the fusion of obsession, technical mastery, and psychological insight that defined the photographer's work. His relentless pursuit of perfection transformed each image into a meditation on mortality, compelling observers to confront life's impermanence and the inevitability of death. Every frame, shadow, and carefully calculated detail contributed to a legacy that haunts history, art, and consciousness, leaving an indelible mark on those who witness his macabre artistry. The city, silent and tense, remained both stage and participant, every alleyway, abandoned building, and shadowed corridor contributing to the narrative constructed with obsessive precision. The print's enduring power testifies to the intersection of brilliance, obsession, and brutality, a chilling reminder of how human mortality can be immortalized under a lens that refuses to look away. Even after the photographer's work reached its apex, Moscow remained haunted by whispers of his images, the memory of frozen faces and captured final moments, lingering like shadows in the streets. Citizens who had seen the prints spoke in hushed tones of nightmares and unease, unable to shake the sense that death had been observed too closely, that life itself had been invaded by a relentless gaze. Rumors abounded that the photographer possessed knowledge beyond ordinary skill, an uncanny intuition that allowed him to capture the exact moment life slipped away, freezing it with terrifying precision. Scholars debated whether his work should be considered genius, atrocity, or an unsettling combination of both, acknowledging the technical mastery while grappling with the ethical implications of immortalizing mortality. The prints themselves seemed to carry a subtle energy, an almost supernatural resonance that unsettled even those trained to study anatomy and photography, the captured subjects appearing unnervingly aware of the observer. Moscow's political climate, fraught with purges, oppression, and pervasive fear, amplified the horror and fascination surrounding his work, every abandoned building and shadowed alley providing a backdrop for the obsessive pursuit of mortality. The photographer's methods were meticulously orchestrated, subjects positioned with precision, lighting manipulated to highlight every contour and shadow, and chemical processes executed with obsessive care to ensure the highest clarity and emotional impact. Stories circulated of his nocturnal wanderings, of sudden appearances in deserted streets or abandoned corridors, capturing images of death that would later be displayed in his studio with chilling exactitude. Visitors described the oppressive atmosphere of the darkroom, the metallic scent of chemicals and mortality thickening the air, shadows dancing across walls as if animated by the presence of the captured dead. Each photograph conveyed a narrative of vulnerability, impermanence, and inevitability, forcing observers to confront realities they might otherwise ignore. The combination of technical brilliance and psychological weight leaving lasting impressions. Scholars noted that the subtle manipulation of expression, shadow, and body positioning created images that were both scientifically precise and emotionally devastating, demonstrating the photographer's obsessive pursuit of perfection. Moscow itself seemed to participate in the creation of these macabre tableaux, the frozen streets, abandoned courtyards, and deserted apartments providing natural stages for the orchestration of mortality. Even unexposed glass plates seemed to radiate a presence, a subtle awareness that defied explanation and contributed to the legend surrounding his work. Observers often reported lingering sensations of unease, as if the dead within the photographs were aware of being watched, a psychological resonance that amplified the impact of each image. The meticulous attention to detail, the choreography of light and shadow, and the obsessive control over every aspect of composition ensured that each print delivered a powerful confrontation with mortality. Stories of coercion, discovery, or the deliberate timing of deaths to capture precise final expressions added layers of horror and fascination to the photographer's legend. The prints forced viewers into an intimate confrontation with death, each image a reminder of life's fragility, the inexorable passage of time, and the relentless presence of mortality. Scholars debated the intersection of technical skill, psychological manipulation, and ethical responsibility, recognizing that brilliance and brutality were inseparable in his work. The city's silent and tense reinforced the chilling effect of his photographs, abandoned structures and shadowed streets serving as collaborators in the creation of macabre imagery. Each image, meticulously calculated, transformed fleeting mortality into a permanent record, leaving observers with a haunting awareness of life's impermanence and the inevitability of death. Even decades later, surviving prints continue to provoke reflection, horror, and fascination, demonstrating the enduring power of obsession fused with technical mastery. The photographer's relentless pursuit of mortality transcended documentation, creating a body of work that forced acknowledgement of uncomfortable truths about the human condition, vulnerability, and the fleeting nature of existence. Every frame, shadow, and detail contributed to a legacy that haunts both history and consciousness, a testament to the fusion of brilliance, obsession, and brutality that defined his vision. Moscow, frozen and fearful, remained a backdrop to the macabre artistry, amplifying the power of images that captured human mortality in its most intimate and haunting form. The photographer's legend persisted through Moscow like a dark fog, with each surviving print provoking both awe and horror, forcing reflection on mortality that was unavoidable and unrelenting. Observers who entered his studio reported an atmosphere charged with the weight of death, shadows dancing across walls, chemicals thickening the air, and prints that seemed to contain the essence of their subjects beyond mere visual representation. Rumors suggested that some images carried subtle shifts over time, the slightest alterations in expression creating a perception that the dead remained aware, a phenomenon that defied scientific explanation and intensified the mystique surrounding his work. Scholars, artists, and ordinary citizens debated endlessly, caught between admiration for technical brilliance and revulsion at the ethical implications of capturing mortality so intimately. The meticulous attention to composition, lighting, and subject placement ensured that every print delivered a powerful psychological impact, leaving lingering impressions of fragility, vulnerability, and inevitability. Moscow itself, frozen and tense, provided a perfect canvas for the photographer's obsession. Every abandoned courtyard, alleyway, and empty apartment enhancing the realism and emotional weight of his work. Observers noted that even the unexposed glass plates seemed to radiate a subtle presence, an almost supernatural awareness that imbued the studio with an unsettling resonance. Stories of his nocturnal excursions, sudden appearances, and vanishing into shadowed streets reinforced the legend, blending fact, rumor, and fear into an inseparable narrative surrounding his art. Each print was carefully orchestrated, with subjects positioned precisely, light manipulated to emphasize contours and shadows, and chemical development executed with obsessive skill, producing images that were both visually stunning and psychologically devastating. The images served not merely as documentation but as confrontations, forcing viewers to reckon with mortality in ways that were inescapable and deeply unsettling. Scholars debated the intersection of artistry, obsession, and morality, recognizing that the photographer's technical skill could not be separated from the psychological weight and ethical challenges his work presented. The city's environment, the pervasive fear of political purges, and the silence of citizens amplified the chilling effect, turning every corner of Moscow into a potential site for observation and creation. Observers experienced lingering dread, subtle sensations of presence, and a heightened awareness of human fragility that persisted long after leaving the studio. His obsession extended to every movement, decision, and scene orchestration, transforming Moscow into a stage upon which mortality was meticulously documented. Each image carried a narrative of life's impermanence, vulnerability, and the inevitability of death, compelling reflection that transcended the immediate horror. Stories of coerced subjects, calculated timing of final moments, and the manipulation of expressions added layers of moral and psychological complexity to the legend, making each print a fusion of art, obsession, and brutality. The photographs, surviving decades later, continue to evoke awe, fear, and reflection, illustrating the enduring power of obsession, technical mastery, and psychological insight. Each frame transformed transient mortality into a permanent, haunting record, leaving an indelible impression on history, consciousness, and the perception of human vulnerability. Moscow's frozen streets and abandoned spaces were forever marked by his work. The city itself intertwined with the creation of images that challenged viewers to confront truths they could neither ignore nor escape. The legacy of the photographer demonstrates the convergence of brilliance, obsession, and brutality, producing prints that endure, provoke, and haunt across time, leaving a chilling imprint on both art and human perception. As the years passed, the brutal photographer's images continued to haunt Moscow, a city frozen in fear and fascination, where every alley, abandoned building, and shadowed corridor seemed to echo the presence of his macabre artistry. The surviving prints served as chilling reminders of mortality, capturing the final moments of life with unflinching precision, leaving viewers with an inescapable awareness of the fragility of existence. Observers who entered the studio described a suffocating atmosphere, the metallic scent of chemicals mingling with an intangible weight that pressed upon all who dared to witness the work. Scholars debated endlessly about the ethical implications of immortalizing death so intimately, acknowledging technical brilliance while struggling to reconcile it with the moral and psychological consequences. The meticulous attention to composition, lighting, and subject positioning ensured that each photograph provoked intense reflection, forcing confrontation with the inevitability of mortality. Moscow itself seemed complicit, frozen streets and desolate spaces amplifying the impact, turning everyday locations into stages for obsession and horror. Rumors persisted that the photographer's methods included precise observation of the dying, capturing expressions at the exact moment life slipped away, a pursuit that blurred the line between artistry and moral transgression. The prints were more than documentation. They were confrontations with life's impermanence, leaving a lasting imprint on all who encountered them. Even unexposed plates seemed to carry energy, a subtle awareness of mortality that defied explanation and enhanced the legend surrounding the work. Observers reported lingering psychological effects, dreams haunted by faces frozen in terror, and an unsettling realization of the proximity of death. Each frame told a story of vulnerability and inevitability, meticulously orchestrated to combine technical mastery with psychological impact, producing a lasting tension between fascination and horror. Moscow's political climate, rife with purges and pervasive fear, heightened the chilling nature of the images, every abandoned corridor and shadowed alley reinforcing the photographer's influence. Stories circulated of sudden appearances, vanishing into darkness, and nocturnal excursions, adding layers to the myth and blending reality with fear. Scholars and artists struggled to separate admiration for the technical skill from revulsion at the subject matter, recognizing that brilliance and brutality coexisted inseparably. The careful choreography of limbs, shadow and light created a visual and emotional weight that ensured each image remained unforgettable, leaving observers with an acute awareness of life's fragility. The prints transformed fleeting mortality into permanent, haunting records, demonstrating the intersection of obsession, genius, and psychological insight. The city itself, silent and tense, served as both backdrop and collaborator, enhancing the power of images that captured the human condition in its most vulnerable and final form. Decades later, surviving photographs continued to evoke awe, horror, and reflection, a testament to the photographer's relentless pursuit of capturing mortality. Each frame forced viewers to confront the unvarnished truth of life's impermanence, challenging assumptions about ethics, artistry, and the human fascination with death. The meticulous development of every image, precise composition, and obsessive attention to detail ensured that the legacy would endure, haunting both history and consciousness. Moscow's frozen streets and abandoned buildings bore silent witness, amplifying the tension, horror, and fascination contained within each print. The photographer's relentless pursuit of perfection immortalized fleeting moments, transforming the ephemeral into permanent testimony of mortality, leaving a chilling imprint on anyone who dared to confront it. Observers, scholars, and citizens alike were left grappling with the paradox of technical mastery and moral ambiguity, an enduring reflection of humanity's confrontation with death. The photographer's legacy endured long after his final images were developed, the prints continuing to provoke reflection, fear, and fascination in Moscow and beyond. Each photograph served as a stark reminder of the fleeting nature of life, the fragility of human existence, and the inescapable presence of death, immortalized through meticulous attention to detail and obsessive craftsmanship. Observers entering the studio reported an almost tangible weight, a presence that seemed to emanate from the prints themselves, blending the macabre with the sublime in a way that challenged the viewer's understanding of reality. Scholars debated the morality of his work, struggling to reconcile technical brilliance with the ethical implications of capturing death so intimately, while ordinary citizens experienced lingering unease, nightmares, and an acute awareness of mortality. The city of Moscow, frozen and silent under the shadow of political purges and pervasive fear, provided a perfect stage for the photographer's macabre art, each abandoned street and corridor reinforcing the chilling narrative embedded in the images. Stories persisted of nocturnal excursions, sudden appearances in shadowed streets, and the vanishing figure with a camera, blending rumor, fact, and myth into an inseparable legend that captivated and horrified observers alike. Every photograph was a carefully orchestrated confrontation with life and death, positioning subjects light and shadow to elicit maximum psychological impact, forcing the viewer to reckon with the inevitable. The prints were more than mere documentation. They were visual and emotional experiences, transforming fleeting mortality into permanent, haunting records that could not be ignored or forgotten. Even unexposed plates seemed to radiate subtle energy, an awareness of mortality that defied explanation and amplified the enduring legend surrounding the photographer. The meticulous staging, precise lighting, and calculated composition of each frame demonstrated an obsession with perfection that transcended ordinary artistry, creating a body of work both technically brilliant and morally provocative. Scholars, artists, and ordinary citizens alike struggled to separate admiration for skill from revulsion at the subject matter, confronting the uncomfortable paradox that defined the photographer's legacy. The psychological resonance of the prints lingered long after viewing, producing a heightened awareness of vulnerability, impermanence, and the inexorable passage of time. Moscow itself became intertwined with the work, every abandoned building, frozen street, and shadowed alley, contributing to the macabre narrative and reinforcing the haunting atmosphere captured in each image. The legacy of the photographer illustrated how obsession, skill, and psychological insight can converge to create work that endures, provokes, and haunts long after its creation, leaving a permanent imprint on both history and consciousness. The print's forced acknowledgement of mortality, confronting observers with truths they might otherwise ignore, challenging assumptions about ethics, artistry, and the human fascination with death. Each frame transformed ephemeral life into permanent testimony, a chilling reminder that mortality is both inevitable and omnipresent, and that obsession can turn fleeting moments into enduring, haunting evidence. Even decades later, the surviving photographs continued to evoke awe, horror, and reflection, their impact undiminished, a testament to the fusion of brilliance, obsession, and brutality that defined the photographer's vision. Observers were compelled to reconcile the technical mastery with the moral weight, a confrontation that left an indelible mark on the understanding of both art and human vulnerability. Moscow, frozen and silent, remained a backdrop to the enduring power of the images, the city itself a collaborator in the creation and amplification of the haunting narrative. The photographer's relentless pursuit of perfection immortalized death, transforming the ephemeral into a permanent and terrifying legacy, leaving an unshakable imprint on all who encountered his work. Each frame, shadow, and meticulously calculated detail contributed to an enduring confrontation with mortality, ensuring that the photographer's art would continue to provoke, haunt, and captivate for generations.